I'd like to clarify a few things. For example, according to the Cato Institute, U.S. citizens were 89% of those convicted of fentanyl trafficking in 2022. 93% of fentanyl seizures happened at legal crossings or interior checkpoints. In other words, a lot of the fentanyl coming into our country are not by so-called illegal immigrants, but by U.S. citizens. Also, this whole notion of all these people who don't even qualify for asylum clogging the system, the fact is, detained individuals with attorneys, that is the critical point here, that people who have attorneys are 10.5 times more likely to be granted relief. So it is when they have attorneys that they can proceed with their asylum claims. Our immigration system is complicated enough as it is. How are people who have language issues and other issues even supposed to come forth with their legitimate asylum claims if they can't even figure out what's supposed to happen? So this idea that there are all these people clogging the system, we should be more concerned, I would say, with providing lawyers for these claimants. And I particularly want to focus on what happens to unaccompanied children who don't have lawyers. And I've witnessed immigration proceedings and led a bipartisan congressional delegation to border facilities in Texas. While there, I saw that the government is always represented by counsel in these proceedings, or maybe not if they don't bother to even show up anymore. But there is no guarantee that children will also have a lawyer. And this is alarming because children are some of the most vulnerable people in our immigration system. I've heard from advocates, including Mr. McKinney today, who shared stories of children going through the process, including a 4-year-old child whose attorney had to describe the immigration process using a comic book. As a 4-year-old, the child wasn't able to sign his name to the documents and instead had to make a squiggle mark. Or a 2-year-old who was so young that when the lawyer visited her, the child was in a playpen. When the 2-year-old saw the lawyer, she tried to give the attorney her teddy bear. The attorney tried to use a cartoon book to explain what was happening, but eventually had to use toys instead. Were it not for the many volunteer attorneys who represented them, these children, these babies, often would have been expected to represent themselves in court with the rest of their lives hanging in the balance. It is objectively ludicrous, not to mention, I would say, inhumane. These are just the stories we're aware of. Nearly half of all unaccompanied children go into the immigration court without a lawyer. For every child who is lucky enough to be represented by an attorney, another is left to fend for themselves. But setting aside the principles of due process, fairness, or even the fact that giving children an attorney is just the humane thing to do, the data itself supports the idea that children should be given lawyers, and that's why we should increase the chances of children being granted relief by providing them attorneys at an earlier point. It reduces waste by streamlining proceedings. It presents clear materials to the court. It ensures that children show up for their hearings. Children cannot represent themselves in court. It's that simple. And to give the judges more authority to just basically toss out hundreds of thousands of cases is not the answer. And that's why I have introduced the Fair Day in Court for Kids Act, which would provide unaccompanied children with legal representation when they go through the process earlier in the process. So, Mr. McKinley, why is having an attorney so crucial for unaccompanied children?
Thank you, Senator Hirono, and thank you for your efforts in this arena. Briefly put, because most of these children have viable claims before the immigration courts and our other agencies. From what I see, unaccompanied children have often been neglected, abused, or abandoned by one or both biological parents and could qualify for relief called special immigrant juvenile status in this country. But navigating that often requires a state custody proceeding as a prerequisite to seeking that relief. If you're unrepresented the child's not going to know about this. And not to mention the asylum claims coming from our hemisphere right now. It's just horrific. So we need to do more to make sure those kids are represented.
So I heard the number 300,000 unaccompanied children are in the system. It's just pretty horrifying to me that they are expected to go through a very complicated, complex, I'm repeating myself, system without lawyers. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of you for being here. I think